Adam Spicer was sitting on his deck with his morning coffee, watching the sun rise, when a flash like the reflection off of a mirror caught his eye. There shouldn't be anything down there, especially at this time of morning. He unfolded his 6-foot frame out of the rocker recliner and whistled for Teddy, his big Heinz 99 hound. Together they headed down toward where he had seen the flash, near the creek running through his property. Teddy, as mentioned, is a big mixed-breed hound about the size of a German Shepherd, but nowhere close to being as good-looking as one. His shaggy brown and black coat made him look a lot bigger and a lot more ferocious than he really is. He went running ahead down the trail without really knowing where they were headed. They were going for a walk. That's all he had to know. He was off somewhere running around in the bush when Adam saw her. A pretty young girl with a huge camera on a tripod. What he had seen was the flash going off, or the sun reflecting off a lens. He watched her for a while before heading down the bank towards where she had set up her camera. Teddy was off chasing something or other. What a guard dog. Miss, you know you're on private property? Adam asked. She jumped and almost fell into the creek at the sound of his voice. He managed to catch her before that happened. She wasn't as young as he first thought, but was very pretty except for the big bruise on her cheekbone. Who or whatever had hit her hard. Jesus Christ, mister. You almost gave me a heart attack, she said when she got over his catching her from falling into the creek and settled on her feet. Like I said, you know this is private property? Yes. But this is so gorgeous I just had to get a photo. The sun coming up gives just the right angle. Well, I couldn't help myself, she tried to explain. He waited for her to continue, which she did eventually. I'm a photographer, professional. I take landscapes and others and sell them. Oh, I do all the others like family, wedding, and that, but landscape is my favorite. Okay, but you didn't really answer my question. Do you know that you're on private land? Yes. I saw the sign when I climbed over the fence and walked down from the road. You can see my car parked way up there. She waved in the general direction of the road into my property where he could just see a white mid-sized car parked on the side of the road. So, from that I'm to take it that you can read, right? She nodded. And just what does the phrase private, no trespassing mean to you? Adam kept his voice even. Not really angry, just a little upset at these people who think that signs don't apply to them. Look, I'm sorry. I know I should have got permission from somebody, but I just had to catch the sun at the right moment. It took me longer to find this spot and get set up than I expected. I'll just pack up my gear and leave, okay? If you want. Did you get it? He asked. Get what? The shot, the photo you wanted. Oh, I think so. I haven't had a chance to go through them. I'll get going now. Just then Teddy decided to make his appearance. When you see something that size running out of the bush right at you, it does have an adverse effect on you. She did the logical thing and screamed. Teddy flew past them and ran into the creek to splash around, then came back out to shake the water off his thick fur coat all over the only 2 humans he could find. Teddy, damn you. I've told you 100 times don't do that. Don't you ever listen, you mangy mutt? Adam laughed at him. He was actually a big goofball, though very protective of his property and the people in his pack, if he perceived a threat. Obviously, he didn't see the woman as much of a threat. He lay down at Adam's feet and grinned up at him as if to say, didn't I do good, huh, Adam? Adam owns this particular part of the land they were standing on, and 25 more acres of it. It's not a farm or anything. The land all around the house is the way it's been for years. He only landscaped a minimal amount around the large, ranch-style home, more for hosting the odd barbecue or a party. He is a computer consultant designing networks for businesses, as well as other work in information technology. He has an office over in Melville, the nearest thing you could call a large town, but is able to work from home quite a bit of the time. He's not married and not looking. Several relationships had turned out badly, and he really doesn't want to get burned again. Anyway, Teddy shook all his excess water onto them and, as he started laughing, the woman tried to act outraged and then began laughing as well. You sure have him trained, she laughed, wiping the water off her face. Then her voice changed to one of alarm. Oh my God, the camera! She quickly went over to where she had it set up and checked it. No harm done. A few drops on the case, that's all. She was still giggling. Look, I take it you own this land. I'm Honey Baker. Really, honey? He asked. She nodded. I hate to think what you went through in school. I'm Adam Spicer. So, now that you're all wet from my attack dog, what do you think about a nice hot coffee? The house is just up here. He waved in the general direction of his home. She paused for a minute and then said, okay, but you'll have to help carry my gear. It took me nearly an hour to get it all down here from the car. She quickly took the large camera lens off the camera and stowed it in a box, followed shortly by the camera body. She folded the heavy tripod and handed it to him, then grabbed the box with the camera and lens and said, "Okay, Adam, lead on. I hope it's not too far." "Nope, maybe a couple of 100 meters. You can't see it from the road, cause of the trees." Adam led off, heading up the bank and onto the path, without looking back. Either she could make it or not his problem. He got back to the house in a few minutes. She wasn't far behind. Teddy was off on his adventures again. He'd show up for breakfast in a while. "How do you take your coffee?" he asked, placing the tripod on the stoop beside the door. "Black is good, thank you." She placed the case down beside the tripod and looked at the view from the front of the house. "Adam, this is simply gorgeous. I'd love to wake up to this every day. Whoever placed this house here really had an eye for the view." He handed her a mug of coffee. "Thank you. I took quite a while to decide on the placement. I wanted to see this every day, as you say." You did this? You built this home?" There was a bit of wonder in her voice, as if building houses was something very unnatural. Yes. It took a couple of years, and I'm still not done what I want. But to all intents and purposes, it's finished. Now, how did you find this spot you wanted for your pictures? It's not like you can see that view from the road." "No, you're right. I actually started to set up beside the road, then saw that spot near the creek through my binoculars. It looked like it might be perfect, but I couldn't wait because the sun was starting to come up. And, truth be told, I didn't know anyone lived out here. I've never seen cars or trucks coming or going in all the times I've driven by." "How long have you been here?" "Going on 5 years. My parents owned the land but never developed it. They used to come up here and camp down near the creek, not too far from where you were. I inherited the land when they passed and decided I'd rather live out here than in town. Long story short, I moved an old trailer out here to live in while I was building. I moved into the house about 3 years ago. My friends and I held a burn the trailer party when I moved in. It was old and not worth anything, and had served its purpose." He stopped talking and enjoyed the sounds of the surrounding woods as he gazed toward the distant horizon. She sat quietly as if she didn't want to disturb the peace and quiet. He looked over and saw that the bruise on her face was actually larger than first thought. He also noticed that she wore a wedding ring. If she was aware of his glance, she gave no sign. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I'd love to have a place like this. It's so peaceful and quiet." She paused long enough to finish her coffee, then glanced at her watch. "Oh God, I've got to get going. He'll kill me if his breakfast is late." "By he, you mean Mr. Honeybaker?" he asked, sure of what the answer would be. "Yeah, the biggest mistake of my life, but I guess I'm stuck with him," she answered with almost total panic in her voice. He gestured at the large bruise. "His handiwork?" "Yeah, he didn't like something or other the other night. Usually it doesn't show. Look, Adam, could you take me up to my car? I can't be late." She was almost crying. He picked up the tripod and camera box and led her over to his truck. He had her at her car up on the road in just a couple of minutes. "Adam, thank you. Really, I know I shouldn't have trespassed. Honey, don't worry about it. Look, if you want to take photos up here, just call and ask." He gave her a business card and wrote his home phone number on the back. "I often work from home, but if there's no answer, try my office. Thank you, Adam, for everything. I have to get going." She drove off in a cloud of dust toward town. There are few things Adam really hates in this world. Liars, cheats, and wife beaters top the list. Just hearing about being used as a human punching bag made him want to help her. The fact that she was easy on the eyes didn't hurt. She wasn't very tall, maybe 5 feet 3 inches and 115 pounds. Without the bruise, she had very pleasant features, not supermodel or anything, but quite pretty. He really couldn't see much of her figure since she was all bundled up in a jacket and jeans, but suspected that he would find that it fit the whole package. He returned to the house and fired up his computer, grabbing a coffee while it booted. He logged on and saw that there were a few things to take care of for clients. That only took about an hour, and then he decided to find out what he could about Honeybaker. It turns out that, while not world-renowned, she was quite well known locally for her work, especially landscapes, as she had said. She had had several shows in the Vancouver area and had lived there until recently. She and her husband had moved to Melville, allegedly for him to pursue career opportunities. "Yeah, I'm the Queen of England too," he thought. Usually that means he was caught with the boss's wife or something. Maybe it had something to do with his abuse of his wife. He continued looking into Mr. John Baker, and the more he found, the less he liked. Honeybaker raced into town from where Adam had dropped her off at her car. She knew that the smallest thing would set John off and she'd get beaten again. She trembled as she pulled into the driveway of the neat, 2-story house and raced inside. Phew, he wasn't up. She rushed to start the coffee and began preparing his breakfast. As she worked, she thought about the man she had just met. I bet he doesn't get off on beating women. Seems like a nice guy. Why isn't he married? Various thoughts ran through her head as she finished getting breakfast ready for her husband. She knew he was up from the sound of the toilet then shower. John Baker was a creature of habit. He expected, no, demanded, that his meals be prepared exactly on time, that the house be cleaned and maintained in a certain way, and that the yard be the best in the neighborhood. Honey was glad that at least he contracted the yard work. She didn't think she'd be able to handle that as well as the housework. Baker sat at the dining table at exactly 7:45, as he did every morning. Honey served his coffee, then juice, then breakfast, always in that order, without variation. He finished his breakfast and grunted something that was supposed to mean goodbye or breakfast was good, or something. She long ago gave up trying to figure it out, as long as he was gone and left her in peace. She cleaned up the dishes and the kitchen, then went upstairs to change and start her day. The bruise on her face would fade in a day or so, but she was worried about the pain in her side where he had punched her in the ribs. She was afraid that something might be broken, but was afraid to go to the family doctor, who just happened to be a friend of John Baker. Funny, she couldn't remember it hurting like this when she was out getting photos this morning. Maybe carrying all that equipment down from the car aggravated whatever injury she suffered. She managed to get dressed and drove into town to pick up some groceries and run a few errands. She noticed the sign for AITA Computer Consultants on an office window above the supermarket. I wonder if that's the Adam I ran into this morning? Must be. There can't be two computer consultants with that name in this town. She parked her car and looked at the card he had given her. Yes, that was his office. She finished running her errands and returned home to the same routine that Baker had literally beaten into her. She didn't know why she stayed with him, but didn't know what to do if she left. She wasn't aware of it, but it was the typical battered housewife syndrome, and there was help available. She just didn't know how to find it. Her biggest problem, at least in Melville, was that she didn't really know anyone. By nature, she was quite quiet and shy, therefore didn't easily socialize. Her husband never took her to any corporate functions, always saying that she was ill, or indisposed, or some other weak excuse. Usually it meant that for some perceived misconduct he had beaten her again, and the bruises couldn't be covered by clothing or makeup. Adam finished his research into Honey and John Baker just around lunch. He really didn't like what he had found out about John Baker. Other than being a wife-beater, it looked very much like he might be a liar, cheat, and thief. As far as Adam was concerned, that was enough justification to look deeper into his affairs, business, and otherwise. Years of work in the computer industry would allow him to do just that. He fixed some lunch and fed Teddy, who promptly went asleep on the deck in the sunshine. If what he initially suspected of Baker was true, then he had just moved the headquarters for his Ponzi scheme from Vancouver to Melville. He sat quietly, mapping out in his head how he would uncover the scheme. He had to be careful. His research had shown that Baker had friends and victims in high places. He couldn't just barge through the front door and start hurling accusations. He also thought about Honey Baker. While he had learned a great deal about her professional life, he could find no real details about her personal life, other than she was married to John Baker. He had no reason to think, nor did he believe, that she knew of her husband's business practices. The look in her eyes as she had sped off this morning was absolute fear, if not terror. Baker wouldn't be the type to involve his wife, or even all the women he flaunted during his numerous affairs, in his business dealings. Adam checked again, and saw that there was contact information for Honey Baker on her website, HB Imaging. He thought about contacting her and telling her she could not only leave Baker, but should and soon. He added her email to his contacts, but didn't message her right away. About this time, Honey Baker was cleaning up after having prepared lunch for her husband. He seemed somewhat distracted, though she would never ask, and really didn't care why. She returned to her computer and set about editing the photos she had taken that morning. She was certain that her husband hadn't known she had even left the house, let alone out driving the back roads in the early morning. More probably, he didn't really care as long as his routine wasn't interrupted. They hadn't shared a bed for years, and hadn't had sex in nearly as long. She long ago understood that she and John had never made love. It just wasn't in his nature to love anyone or anything other than himself. Thank God they didn't have any kids. She wasn't feeling too well, but remembered that she had to pick up some dry cleaning for John. He would be home after work to change, then would be going to some function or other. She didn't care as long as he didn't try to drag her along, but she knew that wouldn't happen, at least tonight. The bruise on her cheek was too noticeable. She drove into town again and parked almost in the same spot she'd occupied in the morning. The cleaners were in the same complex as the supermarket and several other businesses. She was just approaching the entry to the cleaners when she passed out. Adam had just arrived in the parking lot and was parking in his reserved spot as he saw the woman collapse to the ground. He had no idea who it was as he ran over to her while punching 911 into his cell. He and another passerby arrived almost at the same time. Adam quickly pulled off his jacket and bunched it into a pillow before placing it under her head. The other man took off his overcoat and placed it over her. It was then that Adam realized who the woman was. The ambulance arrived quickly, and soon Honey was on the way to the hospital. Adam figured he'd have an hour or two before he could see her, so continued into his office and did what he needed to do. His thoughts were never far from the young woman. He looked up John Baker's business phone and left a message with his secretary that his wife had collapsed and had been taken to hospital. The secretary sounded uninterested, but promised to pass the message on as soon as Baker was free. Adam drove to the hospital and found out from a nurse that Honey had been admitted with severe bruising and a couple of broke ribs. She would undergo further tests to see if the ribs had caused further problems. They originally weren't going to give him any information until he advised them that it was he who had called the ambulance, and that if she, the nurse, wouldn't tell him, he would get the information from his friend who happened to be the administrator. He was soon standing in the doorway of a private room, looking to see if she was awake. She was. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Sore all over." "What happened? Why are you here?" She sounded weak, confused. "I saw you collapse on the sidewalk and called for an ambulance. That's all I know. They brought you here. The nurse says you have some severe bruising and a couple of broke ribs. Your husband?" She nodded without saying anything, tears welling and rolling down her face. "God, he'll kill me. He wants his suit for tonight." "Well, you aren't going anywhere. Can I get it for you? Just tell me where to deliver it." She profusely thanked him and gave him an address in the business district. Adam didn't let on that he already knew that, as well as their home address. "No worries. I'll get the suit and drop it off. I already phoned his office to let him know you're in the hospital." Oh my God. He'll kill me for sure. He said if I ever went to a hospital. "Look, don't worry about it for now. You didn't go to the hospital. You were brought here after you collapsed on the sidewalk. There are at least 2 of us who saw what happened. I'll straighten it out for you." "God, he'll come in and drag me out of here." She was almost hysterical. Adam pushed the call button for the attending nurse. "Look, she's scared that her husband will come and drag her out of here. Is there anything you can do?" "I don't know. Are you?" "No, we're not related. I'm the one who found her on the sidewalk when she passed out. I'll talk to the doctor." "Good, thank you," he said as the nurse closed the door and left them alone again. "Look, honey, I don't know you and you don't know me, but you can't go back to that guy. Is there somewhere you can go, stay, when you get out of here? Somewhere safe?" She shook her head no. "We just moved here. I don't know anyone. All my family are back east. I don't even have many friends in Vancouver. They were all his, not mine." "Okay, you just relax and get well. I'll see what I can do. Please, Adam, don't get mixed up in this. He can really hurt you." "Yeah, well, I just love it when bullies get what's coming to them. Don't worry about me." He left her lying there in the bed looking small, lost, scared, and alone. He got out to his truck and made a call on his cell. "Josh, it's me, Adam. You at the detachment? I need to talk to you for a second. I need your help and some of your muscle. Be there in a few." He pulled into the visitors' parking at the police detachment. His friend, Sergeant Josh Green, was the detachment commander. He quickly found himself sitting across the desk from his friend as he explained about Honey Baker. Classic battered woman syndrome. They're so abused, so brainwashed that in some strange way they think they deserve the beating. "I hate this kind of shit," he said vehemently. "Me too. But for now, we need her safe in the hospital. Do you still have those 2 auxiliary members, Mutt and Jeff?" Josh laughed. "You mean Townsend and Wright?" "Yeah, I see what you're thinking. Maybe a little hospital duty. Just hang on. I'll find out if they're around and available." Josh went to the outer office and spoke to his secretary. "Jill will find out and let me know. If they're available, I'll get them and a couple of others to sit outside her room. Meanwhile, let me get hold of the woman's shelter." "Josh, I don't think she'll go to a shelter. If she goes into hiding, he'll find her somehow. Maybe it's time me and Teddy had a house guest. I'll talk to her. Meanwhile, I promised to run an errand for her." Jill poked her head into the office and advised, with a smile, that Mutt and Jeff would be in shortly. "Thank you, Jill," he turned to Adam. "I'll get them to take shifts sitting outside her door at the hospital. We'll just tell the hospital there have been some threats against her life." "Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Tell Mutt and Jeff that too. It means a lot to me. Adam left the detachment and went to the mall to pick up the dry cleaning for Honey. The owners knew him, so there was no problem with him picking it up. It was almost 5 o'clock, the time Honey said her husband usually would be home. So he drove over to the house instead of Baker's office. He got there just before Baker showed up. As Baker pulled into his driveway, Adam got out of his truck and walked over to him. Your wife is in the hospital. She asked me to get this to you. Stupid witch can't do anything right. Who are you? I saw her collapse on the sidewalk in town and called the ambulance. They're keeping her at least for tonight. Name's Adam. Adam Spicer. Okay. What do I owe you, Spicer? Nothing. The cleaners said they'd put it on your bill. I mean for delivering. I know the cleaners run a bill for me. Not a thing. Just doing a favor is all. Yeah, well. Okay. I gotta run. Got this function with the mayor tonight. With that, he dismissed Adam and went into the house. Adam returned to his truck deep in thought. It's going to be a real pleasure taking this a-hole down, he thought. He drove back to the hospital. Mutt had the first shift outside Mrs. Baker's ward. His instructions were concise. Honey Baker was in protective custody and wouldn't be moved without police approval. Adam poked his head in and saw that she was sleeping. Okay, Mutt. Thanks for doing this. The lady needs all the help we can give her. Auxiliary Constable Townsend. Mutt to his friends, replied, the boss told us what's going on. Let's just say that anyone tries to move her without the boss's say is going to have a very bad day. We don't like wife beaters either. Adam wasn't worried. Mutt stood about 6 feet 3 inches and weighed a very solid 250 pounds. Adam had seen him in action and wasn't worried about anybody giving him too much of a bad time. His partner, Jeff, aka Auxiliary Constable Wright, wasn't much smaller at 6 feet 1 inch and around 230 pounds. Together, though they were auxiliary constables, they were a formidable and intimidating force when they had to be. Adam went home to feed Teddy and start plotting the downfall of John Baker. He called his sister and asked if she could come and visit for a couple of weeks. He might have a house guest that needed female help. Adam, what have you gotten into this time? Asked Sheila, his older sister. It's a long story, sis. Do you know who Honey Baker is? She's some kind of artist or something, isn't she? Or something. She's a photographer, and from what I've been able to find out, a pretty good one. She's in trouble, and I might have her staying here when she gets out of hospital. Her husband beat the shit out of her, and she's got a couple of broken ribs along with bruising and stuff. Adam sipped at his glass of wine, thinking back to his encounter early this morning. How the hell did she carry that stuff down from the highway if she had broken ribs? Another mystery to solve. He became aware that Sheila was talking. So when you know for sure if she's staying with you and that big hound of yours, let me know. I can be there in a couple of days. Thanks, sis. Hi to Jack and the kids. I hope it's short term, but you never know. You be good, Adam. Be sure to let me know one way or the other. Will do. Thanks again, sis. Love you. He ended the call. He wasn't worried about having enough room. He had 5 bedrooms in 2 different wings of the house. The hallways from the bedrooms all lead to the central pod that had the kitchen, dining room, living room, and den or office. Sheila and Honey could use the west wing where there were 3 bedrooms. His master bedroom was in the east and easily took up at least half of it, leaving enough space for the 5th, smaller bedroom. It had been a while since any women had spent time in the house. Adam didn't seem to have much luck with prospective partners. He tried and been burned 3 times, so had in essence stopped looking. The first had been Nancy. She moved in with him shortly after the house was finished. They both knew that it wouldn't last. She had made it quite evident that she was looking for a friend with benefits for the winter. She moved in at the beginning October and left at the beginning of the following April. Adam knew that was going to happen. Nevertheless, he was sad to see her go. She was a nice, warm, and caring person and a great lover. There had been a few tears on both sides, but she was off on her adventures. Adam assured her that she would be welcome if she ever came back this way. The second big mistake had been Janice. She sort of caught Adam on the rebound, not too long after Nancy had departed. He didn't realize just how high maintenance she was until she began to criticize how much time he spent working, and if he had to overnight it somewhere, the recriminations when he got back home were unreal. She couldn't seem to get it through her head that in order for him to buy all these things she just had to have, he had to earn real money. She departed for greener pastures one December afternoon while he was at work in his office in town. Frankly, he was happy to see her go. Her whole attitude of me, just wasn't worth the aggravation he felt when she was around. He happened to run into her a couple of times. She was hanging onto the arm of her latest sugar daddy and barely acknowledged his existence. He later learned that she had gone through quite a few men, married and single. She didn't care as long as they had money to spend on her. She had apparently left town under a cloud after an affair with a town official became known. The last had been Megan. After Janice, Adam had pretty much kept to himself for about a year. He met Megan at a dinner party at a friend's house. She happened to be friendly with his buddy's wife, and they seemed to hit it off. He had her out to the house a few times, and they got along really well. The sex was good, and Megan had shown that she could be a good homemaker as well. Adam began to think she was the one, and invited her to move in about 6 months after they met. Everything was fine for the first couple of months. They settled in, and she seemed to enjoy living out in the rural area away from town. Then Adam began to notice a change. It was subtle at first. He caught her in a few lies about where she had been and what she had been doing. It was nothing major, but he was starting to get that old feeling back again. It came to a head one January afternoon. Adam had told Megan that he had to go out of town overnight on business. This happened occasionally, so she didn't make a big deal about it. He packed his overnight bag, kissed her goodbye, and headed into town. He just got into his office when his customer called to postpone the visit for a week. He finished what he had to do in the office and decided to surprise Megan. He drove back out to the property to find an unknown vehicle parked in front of the garage. He drove in and parked, apparently without being heard, then went into the house, dreading what he was sure he would find. Megan and her lover were on the bed. His bed. Not yet naked, but working on it. They were so intent on their passion that they never noticed Adam standing in the door of the bedroom. He silently withdrew to plan his next course of action. His driveway was unpaved and fairly steep in sections. No problem for him since he had a good four-wheel drive truck. It would, however, be a problem for the man with Megan since he was driving a fairly standard two-door, two-wheel drive sedan. Adam decided to make it a little more difficult for them, since Megan would be leaving with her lover, and only with what she had originally brought with her. He would ensure that. He went back up to the entrance of his driveway. He kept the loader up there instead of near the house because that was where it was most needed. He fired it up and dumped load after load of snow onto the driveway, making it impassable unless you had a good four-wheel drive vehicle, or the loader. He went back to the house and, taking his truck, pushed the car into the snowbank lining the drive into the garage, making sure it was good and stuck. Yes, there were some scrapes on the car, but Adam was sure they wouldn't be an issue, if they were noticed at all, at least today. The couple would have other things on their minds. That part of his plan complete, he parked in the garage and locked it up, making sure the shed where his tools were kept was also locked. Then he entered the house, making the usual amount of noise he would when entering his own house. All he could hear were the sounds from the bedroom. He walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of the bedroom. They still didn't notice he was home. He went into his den or office and grabbed a small digital camera and went back to the bedroom. He had taken about a dozen photos when Megan suddenly realized he was there and screamed. The man with her fell all over himself, getting away from Megan and the bed, expecting that Adam was going to lay a beating on him. "You two have exactly 15 minutes to get your shit together and get out of here." Adam's voice was flat and as unemotional as he could make it. That made it even more scary to Megan and the man with her. "Adam," Megan began crying. It's not what? You're screwing another man in my bed? Get your shit and get out. The clock is ticking." The man with Megan was cowering in the corner, afraid to come and get his clothes off the chair near the door. Adam turned away and walked toward the kitchen. 14 minutes 45 seconds, he said over his shoulder. "Adam, you can't," cried Megan. "Not only can but will. 14 minutes, then I throw you, and you're cheating, but out the door. Your shit will follow." His voice remained flat, unemotional, and scary. "But Adam," she started, then realized he was no longer listening. Quickly, she gathered her clothes and dressed, as did the man with her. "Jesus Christ. He's crazy. He'll kill us. Get your stuff. I hope he'll let us leave. For God's sake, George. He won't kill us. Help me get my stuff." She began throwing items into a suitcase. 12 minutes, called Adam. He started down the hallway toward the bedroom. The man called George, scared to death, scampered past him and ran to the door to put on his boots and coat. "Adam, please. We can talk about this." Megan was starting to panic. There was no way she could fit everything into the suitcases that she had brought with her. Adam had been good to her, and she had a lot more to leave with than she did when she arrived. Adam didn't say a word. He grabbed the suitcase sitting on the floor and walked down the hall to the door, opened it and threw the suitcase out into the snow. He went back into the house and got a large garbage bag. Wordlessly, he went to the bedroom where Megan was still trying to close the second suitcase and started stuffing her clothes and things into the garbage bag. Once full, it followed the suitcase out into the snow. Adam took time to notice that George really was stuck, but was working away at trying to get the car out of the snowbank. Too bad. They could walk to town. He wasn't about to help them. He went back inside and wordlessly grabbed Megan by the arm and dragged her down the hall to the door. He threw her coat at her and kicked her boots towards her. He went back to the bedroom and got the second suitcase and threw it out to join the rest of her belongings in the snow. Megan was openly bawling now. No one had ever done this. No one had ever made her accountable. She'd always used her sex appeal and personality to get out of bad situations. It was a rude awakening at the worst possible time. As soon as she went through the door, Adam slammed it shut and double-locked it. He went around and made sure all the other doors and windows were locked as well. Then reaction started to set in, and he went into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and put his head in his hands. It was at this precise moment that he decided that he's better off on his own. No more romantic entanglements. A while later, there was a pounding on the door. He looked to see Megan standing there. He opened the door and, as flatly as he could, said, "Get the hell off my property. Now." "Adam, we're stuck. Would you call a wrecker, please?" "Too bad. Please, there's no cell service. We can't call." Megan was crying, almost hysterical. "Well then, you better start walking, cause if that car is on my property tomorrow, it's getting seized and impounded." "Adam, please, you wouldn't. You don't want to find out. If it's there in the morning, it's gone." With that, Adam closed and locked the door again. Realizing the futility as soon as she tried the door, Megan made her way back to the car. "George, he won't call. We'll have to walk till we get cell service. It's like about 5 miles toward town or 4 up the hill." "Jesus, I don't have the gear for walking. These are commuter boots. Only good for riding around in. You're sure he won't help? For God's sake, George, would you?" Angrily, Megan set off up the driveway. "Are you coming? It'll be dark in about an hour." Reality was setting in for Megan. She was starting to realize that she had made a huge mistake. Adam's demeanor scared the hell out of her. Next morning, Adam drove his truck up to where the front end loader was parked. It was evident that a tow truck had managed to get the car up to the top of the driveway. He didn't know how or when. He just hoped that it cost the two of them a lot of money. Half-heartedly, he cleared the drive and went into town to the office to try and get some work done. His mind wasn't on it, and he returned home after running a few errands. There were several messages from Megan. She didn't mean it. It was a mistake. Yada yada. He erased them. One message from George said that he, meaning Adam, would get his. That got erased as well. He wasn't too worried about George or anything he thinks he might do. He went into the bedroom and stripped the bed, taking all the sheets and blankets into the laundry. The mattress he took and threw into the back of his truck to take to the dump. He wouldn't sleep on a mattress that had been used for cheating. He found a few items that Megan had left behind. They also went into the garbage. It was just after Megan was gone that Teddy arrived and adopted Adam. Adam had been in town and saw a display for the SPCA in the mall near his office. On a hunch, he talked to the woman looking after it and, long story short, a shaggy ragamuffin of a dog joined Adam on his property. Teddy readily took to Adam and his new home. In very short order, he had explored almost all of it, even though it was snow-covered. His goofy grin told Adam all he needed to know. Teddy was home. Adam arrived at the hospital just after lunch. Jeff, Auxiliary Constable Wright, was on duty at the door and reported all was well. No one had come to visit Honey except for the medical staff. Adam went into the room and found Honey was awake. "How are you feeling?" he asked. She looked so frail and small there in the bed. Not too bad as long as I don't laugh," she replied, her voice stronger than yesterday. "Okay, I'll try not to tell any bad jokes." He looked at her with genuine concern. "Look, you can't go back to him, you know. At best, you'll just stay a human punching bag. At worst, he'll kill you, slowly." Adam tried to keep the worry out of his voice, while emphasizing that he was, in fact, worried about the possible outcomes. "I know," Honey started sobbing. "I know, but I don't know what to do. I've got nowhere to go." "Well, once the doctor says you're well enough, I'll take you out to my place. My sister said she'd come down and help look after you. Then we'll decide where we go from there. The first thing is to get you away from him. You'll be safe, and he probably wouldn't be able to find you there either." "I can't," she started to say. "Yes, you can, and will. Once you're healed, we'll worry about the future. Your immediate job is to get well enough to leave here. No arguments." "Well, okay, but only till I'm healed." Honey was still crying quietly, wondering why this big, gentle man would help her. "Look, a friend of mine is going to come in and talk to you. He's the policeman in charge of the detachment here. He wants to find out more about your husband beating you." "Oh God, I can't talk to the police. He'll kill me for sure. Look, you just don't know it yet, but you're done with him. My sister and I, will make sure you don't have to be afraid of him again. My friend Josh will be in to talk to you later today. Just answer his questions honestly and let him take it from there. Well, okay, I guess. But, she hesitated, afraid to ask, can you be here too? If you want. Now get some rest. I have to get hold of my sister and get her out here. Josh patted her shoulder and left the room. Jeff was just returning from the cafeteria with a cup of coffee. Look, Jeff, she's scared out of her mind of her old man. Do you know this guy? Jeff shook his head. No. If he tries anything, or even tries to get in to see her, you have permission to use whatever force necessary to keep him away. I already talked to Josh. He doesn't want to know. No worries, Adam. Unless it's a doctor or nurse, they ain't getting in there. I haven't had to beat on a wife beater for a while. It would be a pleasure, Jeff said. His easy demeanor belied his toughness. Me and Mutt have a bet which one of us gets to tussle with him first. Adam knew that Honey would be safe. He called his sister from his office only to be told by her husband, Jack, that she was already on the way and should be at his place in 2 days. He grinned, knowing that she knew him too well. Later that afternoon, he was sitting in the hospital room as Josh gently questioned Honey about the beating she'd received, starting with the most recent. The nurse that was there with him was alternately turning white and red as she reacted to the answers. Adam just felt a cold rage welling in him. If it was the last thing he did, he would make sure that Baker paid for this. He began formulating a plan even as the questioning continued. Finally, the questioning was over, and Josh took his recorder back to the office for transcription. Adam patted Honey on the shoulder and told her to rest. He'd be in tomorrow. He spoke briefly to the on-call physician, who assured him that Honey wouldn't be fit for release for at least another 3 days or so. Good. Sheila would arrive before that. Between them, they could get her to safety. 3 days later, Adam and Sheila pulled into the hospital parking lot and parked in the loading area. They used Sheila's car since climbing in and out of Adam's big pickup would almost be impossible for Honey. They went in to find Honey dressed and waiting for them. After introducing the two women, Adam got a wheelchair from the nurse's desk to wheel Honey out to the car. One of the nurses came and took over. Adam followed them out of the hospital. He stopped to talk to Mutt. I can't thank you guys enough. You went above and beyond. How many of you looked after this? There were 4 of us, me and Jeff and a couple of others. We all volunteered when we heard what had happened to her. Mutt, can you give me a list of the names and their home addresses? I want to make sure they're properly thanked. Will do, Adam. I'll email them as soon as I check in at the detachment. Thanks, Mutt, and thanks to the other guys too. Let them know, okay? Mutt nodded his head, and Adam hurried to catch up to the women who were almost out the door. He helped Honey into the back seat of his sister's car and jumped into the passenger seat. There was no way Sheila would let him drive her car. Sheila drove out to the property and started down the driveway. Let me out here. I'll make sure nobody can follow us down unless they're walking. I'll walk down to the house. Sheila stopped the car. Gonna put the loader across the entrance? You got it. Go ahead. I'll walk down. Won't be long. Sheila continued down the drive, and Adam started up the loader. With some back and forth jiggling, he managed to almost completely block the entrance to the drive. Anyone coming down would be doing it on foot. Sheila was just getting all of Honey's stuff out of the car when Adam arrived. Look, we're going to have to go to her place and get clothes and stuff. Yeah, I was thinking of that. Maybe what we'll do is take both vehicles into town. I'll make sure Baker is in his office, and you and Honey can go to the house and get whatever she needs and wants. We've got the room so we can get all her things at once. Sounds like a plan. I'll talk to Honey. I put her in the middle bedroom. I'm nearest the kitchen. Sheila set off to discuss the matter with Honey. Adam put the coffee on and called down the hall if they wanted coffee or tea. Good thing the answer was coffee. Once made, he put 3 mugs of coffee on a tray, loaded whitener and sugar, and went down to the bedroom where Honey was laying on the bed quietly talking with Sheila. He placed the tray on the dresser and sat down in a spare chair with his own coffee. Honey, this is your room as long as you need it. Or want to leave. I mean it. I don't know what's going to happen with your husband, but you can't go back to him. I think Sheila and I agree. We won't let that happen. I feel like I'm imposing. You're doing so much, Honey replied. Why? Why are you doing this for me? I don't think I'm worth it. Sheila jumped in. You're worth every bit of it. We're helping because you need help, and nobody should go through what you did. There's no excuse for that at all. We're here to help you get better, physically and mentally. I'm a registered psychologist, and me and Adam, will work with you to get you through this. But you're giving up so much, just for me. We're not giving up anything. Adam has the time and space. I'm on hiatus, so I'm not officially practicing right now. My husband and kids know why I'm here and are good with it. We're here to help, and you will accept it. And anyway, where are you going to go? And how?" Honey was quiet for a few moments. "Okay, I guess I'm in your hands. Still, I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." Adam piped up, "You getting well will be payment enough. That's your job, your only job. Let us look after the rest." Adam stood up and started to leave. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Sis, make some plans for tomorrow afternoon. We'll need Honey to go and pick out what she wants and needs. I'll look after Baker. I'll be in the dinner office. I'm going to start ruining his coming days." Honey looked worried. "You're not going to hurt him?" "Oh no, with a phony like that the only hurt he understands is monetary. That, and my friend Josh going over to chat about spousal abuse, should serve to start. He's done like dinner, he just doesn't know it yet. What are you going to do? He knows some powerful people who can hurt you. The best part about being out here and doing what I do is that powerful people have very few ways of getting at me. And when I expose Baker for the phony he is, they'll be running to distance themselves from him. Now don't you worry. Let me look after that. You just relax and let Sheila help you." With that, he left the bedroom and went to his office. The great thing about arrogant a-holes like Baker is they think they're smarter, better, richer, and nobody can do anything to them. Adam logged onto his computer and started doing some searching. Soon he was able to find Baker's internet provider and his IP address. A few minutes with a special program he had developed had him logged into Baker's office computer. Good enough. He could wait until evening when Baker was out and about, no doubt schmoozing at some function or other with the well-to-do set and the wannabes. There really was no hurry. He could actually wait until after Josh invited Baker downtown for an interview. Oh, to be a fly on the wall for that one. The next day, using both his truck and Sheila's car, the three drove into town. The ladies would go to the house to get Honey's belongings as soon as Adam confirmed Baker was in his office and not likely to move. Adam got to the office building just in time to see Baker being seated in the backseat of a police car. Well, for sure the women wouldn't be interrupted anytime soon. He called Sheila on her cell and explained what he had seen. The two women drove to the house and, using the keys Honey still had, entered and began packing things she would need. Adam arrived shortly afterward and began placing some of the bigger items, like computers and that, into his truck. He had to chuckle when he saw Honey and Sheila carrying out some of the prints that had adorned the walls of the house. Adam drove back and parked down the street from Baker's office. Almost 2 hours after the police had picked him up, Adam saw Josh drive up in an unmarked cruiser and let Baker off. He did not look like a happy man. Josh drove past Adam and waved at him. Apparently the interview had gone well, at least from the police point of view. Adam returned the wave and drove back to the house. The women were just finishing loading the car with Honey's belongings. He waited down the street as the two women left and headed back to his place. He didn't wait long. Baker came roaring down the street and pulled into his driveway. His secretary was in the passenger seat. Adam couldn't help but think what an a-hole. As far as he knows, his wife is in the hospital and he's got some eye candy on his arm. It was going to be a pleasure ruining him. Later that evening, after having a quiet dinner, the women retired to the living room to watch a movie. Adam went into his home office and got to work. Baker, being a creature of habit, had left the office computers on, maybe so he could access them from home. Adam logged on and began searching the computer, looking for passwords and banking information. He struck pay dirt after a relatively short search. He not only had Baker's local banking information and passwords to all the accounts, but he had discovered where Baker was sending the money he was stealing from his alleged investors. From what he could see, Baker regularly checked with the bank in the Cayman Islands on Fridays. Funds were transferred into the account Monday morning. Somewhat irregular, but that was the pattern going back at least 5 months. He next got together and printed out a list of the investors that Baker was stealing from, together with their email addresses. His plan was developing. He wanted to not only ruin Baker, but make sure that his investors at least recouped some of their inevitable losses. He also wanted Honey to have sufficient funds available to support herself for the foreseeable future. She, at least, deserved that. John Baker was not having a good week. First, the police hauled him down to the detachment and questioned him about beating Honey. He thought that maybe he'd talked his way out of it, but wasn't sure. He'd have to get Honey to talk to the police. Now the problem was finding her. He knew she had been admitted to the hospital and had just discovered that she had been released the day before he was interviewed by the police. No, they didn't know where she was. They thought she had gone home. A young woman had helped her. They thought it was his secretary. He knew it wasn't his secretary. She was at this moment giving BJ to Baker. She hated doing this, but Baker paid her well. He knew his wife wasn't at home. he checked the bedrooms upstairs. He was so preoccupied with his own problems he didn't notice that almost everything belonging to his wife was missing. After talking to the hospital, he sat back to enjoy the BJ from his secretary when he suddenly noticed that a lot of the photos and prints were missing from the walls. Jesus Christ, had she left him? Pushing his secretary out of the way, he ran upstairs and checked the dresser and closets. None of her stuff was there. He was enraged but didn't know where to focus his anger. He went back into the living room where he'd left his secretary and started beating her. She wasn't Honey, however, and fought back, much to Baker's surprise. "You witch. Hit me, will you? You're done. You're fired." He continued to try and hit her, and she was just as determined that he wouldn't. She was able to escape the house, grabbing her purse on the way out, slamming the door in John Baker's face. Sex was one thing, but she wouldn't ever take a beating just for a paycheck. She quickly walked down to the corner store about 2 blocks away and had them call a cab, which he took to the police office. Now Baker was really pissed. He had planned on taking his secretary to the mayor's function tonight, and maybe using her to seduce some new investors. He phoned several other women he'd used over the months. None were available. He gave up and, for the first time, decided to go alone. Christ, where was his wife? Adam set up a throwaway email to use and emailed Baker's investors that maybe they should take a closer look at their relationship and ask some pointed questions about the so-called audited statements he was providing. Specifically, perhaps ask the company who was allegedly auditing the financial statements if the statements were indeed accurate. He accessed Baker's Cayman Island account and changed the sign-in credentials. Baker would no longer be able to either deposit or remove funds from the account. Satisfied for now, he made sure that only he could access the Cayman account, then shut down the computer. Since Baker was at some function or other this evening, and most of his investors were probably there as well, Adam didn't really expect the shit to start hitting the fan until 1 or 2 days later. He was unaware that the avalanche had already started with one investor who had been having second thoughts. Adam's email had hit home, and the wheels were turning on the huge truck coming towards Baker. Adam checked on the 2 women and found their bedroom doors closed. He was left alone with his thoughts. Grabbing a beer, he stepped out on his patio and sat down in a deck chair. Teddy came padding over and laid his large head on Adam's knee with a scratch-my-ears look. He was planning the next step for Baker. Other than monetarily, he wanted to ruin him completely. The next morning, he accessed the federal no-fly list and added Baker to it, using his real name, date of birth, and passport number. The reason was suspected support of the Tamil Tigers, a reputed terrorist organization. That would ensure that he couldn't leave the country when the heat began to get too intense. He contacted Baker's various credit card issuers and reported the cards stolen. He was able to do it since he had obtained so much personal info from Baker's computer. So far, so good. Adam went online to a different bank in the Cayman Islands and opened an account under a false name. He would move the funds now in Baker's inaccessible account to this one and use it to at least partially repay the money Baker had stolen. Finally, he set up an account in Honey's name in another bank. Part of the money Baker had stolen would go into this. He figured that even around 10% would be a really good start for Honey, no matter what she decided to do. He decided to wait until the evening before beginning to transfer the money. However, he did set up his computer to monitor Baker's Cayman Island account activity and attempted logons. He then began to receive return emails in his throwaway account asking how he knew Baker was stealing and what proof did he have. He had expected that, and in a return email was able to send a copy of the report that investors had received and a report of what was actually in the investment account. Work done for the day, Adam joined the women on the patio where they were enjoying a coffee and the view, not necessarily in that order. Adam decided he would wait to tell Honey about what he had accomplished. If the whole thing went south, the less she or anyone else knew, the better. "Good morning, ladies. Beautiful day, no?" he greeted them. "Adam, you were working early," replied Sheila, "putting in some overtime?" "Good morning, Adam. Yes, it's beautiful. And the view is gorgeous," said Honey. "Oh no, I had some things to take care of. All done, so I can relax the rest of the day. Maybe I'll go down and drown some worms and see if there's any trout that want to come to dinner." "I agree about the view. However, I think we actually had this conversation a few days ago." He actually hadn't fished the creek for months, though there were some good-sized fish in it. Adam sat back in his chaise lounge, enjoying as the women had the view and the coffee. He knew that Sheila was bursting with curiosity about what he would do to Baker, but didn't really want to ask while Honey was around. Time enough to tell them. Honey was just on her first full day of healing. She'd be here a while. "A few days ago? Okay, you two, what's going on?" Sheila sounded not only curious but exasperated. "Honey, do you want to tell her, or should I?" Adam wanted to give Honey first crack at explaining. "Oh no, Adam, you tell her. I'll just pipe up if you miss something," Honey giggled. "Okay, sis. Here's what happened a few days ago, and why we had this discussion about the view." He began to relate the events of a few days ago when he caught Honey trespassing, telling everything he knew up to last night, omitting the parts about the accounts, credit cards, and no-fly list. "And so, Honey is now staying here, hiding from John Baker. I have plans for Mr. Baker which you two don't want to know about, at least yet." "Are you?" started Sheila. Adam cut her off. "I'm not saying anything. Trust me, if you don't know you can't be made to tell if this thing goes south. I don't think it will, but you never know." Honey gave him a long look. "Adam, be careful. John has lots of powerful friends. I'll be careful, but I wonder if they'll still be friends when the shit starts flying. He might find that all of a sudden his friends won't take his calls." "Oh, to be a fly on the wall," he laughed. "Anyway, ladies, I'm off to do some work around here. I'll leave Teddy to look after you. He's a big suck until somebody tries to do something he doesn't like the people he knows or what he thinks is his property. I won't be far anyway, just puttering in the shed and the garage." He was telling the truth about Teddy, who had already accepted Sheila and Honey as part of his pack. About an hour later, he was in the garage when Sheila called him. "Adam, there's a John Baker on the phone. Can you take it, or should I take a message?" "Be right there," he called back, stopped what he was doing and headed back to the house. He had half expected the call since Baker knew he'd run that errand for Honey. "Adam Spicer." "Mr. Spicer, it's John Baker. Remember we met when you dropped some cleaning off at my place? What can I do for you, Mr. Baker?" "It's my wife. Nobody seems to know where she is. Do you know, or have you seen her? Last I knew she was in the hospital. That must be, 3 or 4 days ago. How's she doing? Are they going to release her soon? It was quite a fall she took." "No, damn it, that's why I'm calling. She was released 2 days ago, and nobody seems to know where she went. I'm glad she's out. You sure she's not home, or visiting friends or something? I'd have no reason to see her after she got admitted. I just checked on her that one day when she said something about the cleaning, but you already know that." "Yeah, I do. That's why I thought." "Thought what, Mr. Baker? Maybe you'd picked her up." "Why the hell would I do something like that? I thought she was still in the hospital till you called." "Well, I thought." "Who answered the phone, your wife?" "I'm not married. My sister is visiting from back east." "Well, it's true, but he doesn't need to know why." "Oh, if you do see my wife, would you let me know?" He gave Adam his phone numbers. "Well, I don't expect to see her or anyone else way out here, but I'll keep an eye out." "I'd appreciate it." Baker hung up and Adam grinned. "Now it starts," he thought to himself. Adam went into his office and checked his email and also account activity for the Caymans. He had quite a few replies from worried investors, but so far there hadn't been any attempts to log on to the Cayman bank account. He was sure that wouldn't last. He logged off the computer and went back out to the garage to resume his project. Sheila showed up a few minutes later. "Adam, what did Baker want?" asked Sheila. "Seems he can't find his wife. Damnest thing. I thought she was still in the hospital." "You're bad. I thought that's maybe what it was. Honey's resting so she doesn't know about the call," she laughed. "Good. What she doesn't know won't upset her. She needs rest and healing. She has all the time she needs to do both." "Yeah, I know. But if Baker ever found out? Well, I'm not going to worry too much about that till it happens. I am, however, going to set up a few surprises for unwelcome visitors." "I don't even want to ask," she laughed. "I'm going to make some fresh coffee. Want some?" "Sure, I'll be there in a few minutes," Adam replied, and went back to completing the small project he was working on. The days went by. Only Adam or Sheila left the property to get supplies, and not together. Honey showed no desire to leave the comfort of the large home, and though physically she was much better, mentally she had hardly started to heal. Sheila decided that she was well enough to start working on that part of her healing. Without seeming to, she began to work with Honey. It would be a long, hard road. She just hoped Honey was up for it. Adam had transferred all the money out of Baker's account into the one he had opened, then transferred about 10% of it to the account he had opened up for Honey. She wasn't aware of it, but the account held just under $1 million. Baker had been a prolific and successful thief. The high point of John Baker's week turned out to be taken to the police detachment for questioning. He couldn't find his wife. He'd fired his secretary, and now the phones were ringing off the hook from investors wondering what was going on with all the money they had invested with him. There were, in fact, so many calls that he set the office phone to go straight to the answering machine. As he had promised the first few callers, he would issue dividend checks in the hopes that that would at least give him some time to get things together. The one call he couldn't ignore was from the officials of the small stock exchange where his investment company was listed. They wanted to know about all the phone calls they were getting regarding his account and what he planned to do to bring the value of the account up to the minimum required to maintain his listing on the exchange. He made the usual assurances that funds were forthcoming immediately, if not sooner. The exchange officials were satisfied, for now. Damn, he shouldn't have fired that secretary. She could do the dividend checks and mail them in a couple of hours. He'd have to do it by hand since he had never learned how to use that particular program on the company computer. He set to work, pausing only long enough to ensure that the front door to his office was locked. To get this done, he needed no interruptions. The phone continued to ring. More investors with more questions. Baker finished his task late that afternoon and managed to get the envelopes in the mail before the final pickup for the day. He needed a good, stiff drink and headed home to complete that very task. He could check his Cayman account from home. He'd done that often enough. Much to his surprise, he was unable to log on. None of the access codes worked, nor did his passwords, old or new. Must be some kind of computer shit, he thought. He'd call the bank in the morning from his office and get that straightened out. Baker didn't sleep well that night. He kept having dreams about investors wanting their money back and holding him hostage until they got it. He was still tired when he headed into the office. He set the phone to answer, instead of going straight to the answering machine. Before he could call his bank in the Caymans, the first of many phone calls for the day started. The checks he had issued had bounced. NSF. What the hell? He called his bank and tried to talk to the manager. She was unavailable, but an account manager would call him back within a few minutes. While waiting, he tried to call the bank in the Caymans. The manager would call him back. He was in conference at the moment and couldn't be disturbed. Finally, the account manager of his local bank called him back. No, there were no funds in his business account, and no, he couldn't use the previously arranged line of credit. That account had been frozen, and the bank was in the process of issuing a demand for payment. He had 30 days to arrange repayment in full. Stunned, Baker sat back in his office chair, behind his big expensive desk, and wondered just what on earth was going on. He decided to take an early lunch and try to get back to the Caymans Bank later. He went to his favorite restaurant where he was well known and well regarded. Imagine his surprise when his credit card was refused, as was the next and the next. He barely had enough cash to cover the check. He went back to his office to find one of his investors camped out at the door to his office. Evan Jones was not a happy man. He had met John Baker at a mayoralty function. Baker had a beautiful young woman on his arm and oozed charm and wealth. Long story short, he had bought into the spiel that Baker was selling and decided to invest about half of his portfolio with Baker's investment company. Mr. Jones hadn't got as far as he had in life by being a fool. When he first received the mysterious email a couple of days ago, he started doing some checking on his own. No, the chartered accountants ostensibly auditing Baker's company were not only not auditing it, they had never even heard of it. Of course, Baker hadn't returned his phone call yesterday, certainly 2 red flags. Then he had received a dividend check from Baker, only to have payment refused for non-sufficient funds. The 3rd red flag. Now Mr. Jones wasn't only worried, he was furious. Not only at Baker, who more than deserved it, but at himself, for going against his gut feeling and falling for the schmooze. Now he was sitting outside Baker's office waiting for his return. He'd wait as long as he had to. Finally, John Baker showed up. He tried to hide his misgivings about having one of his more recent investors waiting outside his office. He invited Mr. Jones in and, in a way that had helped him sell millions of dollars worth of phony investments, reassured the reluctant Mr. Jones that it was all a big misunderstanding. Only later did Jones realize that Baker hadn't answered his pointed questions about the auditors. Meanwhile, as soon as Evan Jones had left, Baker again locked the office and called the bank in the Caymans. The manager, initially reluctant to speak with him, eventually did. He wondered what his bank had done to deserve having Mr. Baker close his account and transfer all the money out of it. Of course, this was news to Baker, and he hung up the phone realizing that maybe, just maybe, everything he had worked toward, namely enriching himself at others' expense, had been for nothing. He began to realize he was flat broke except for the house he now lived in, and it had a sizable mortgage on it. He was a very worried and scared man as he locked his office and drove home in his leased Mercedes. Somehow, he thought, his missing wife had to have something to do with all of this. But how? She knew nothing about his business affairs. He had made sure of that. And anyway, she almost needed his help to balance her checkbook every month. No, it had to be someone else. But who? Not his investors, surely. They got their dividend checks regularly and had no problem except for today. He made a mental note to call into the bank and speak with the manager personally. The manager being a woman, he was sure he could get her to see his way. It had always worked before. Baker couldn't believe that the police were sitting in his driveway waiting for him. As soon as he stepped out of his Mercedes, he was handcuffed and placed in the back of the police cruiser. He was read his rights by the passenger as the car sped down the street toward the police detachment. To his surprise, it didn't stop there, but continued on to the courthouse. There Baker was led, still in handcuffs behind his back, into a judge's chambers where sat the judge. Behind his imposing desk, a Crown Special Prosecutor, and much to his surprise, his own lawyer. He was relieved to find that this had nothing to do with Honey. His feeling of relief was short-lived when the Special Crown Prosecutor laid out the charges. He was under investigation for fraud and theft, numerous counts on each charge. Other charges were, as they were meeting, being filed. By the time the prosecutor finished speaking, Baker was in a cold sweat, outwardly composed and feigning outrage at this treatment. He was realizing that his world as he knew it was coming to an end. Bond would be $1 million, and Baker would have to surrender his passport. By taking a second mortgage on his home, Baker was able to post bond. His lawyer assured him that they would be able to successfully fight the charges, and with a handshake, left Baker standing on the steps of the courthouse, with no way home except to walk. Baker would deliver the passport to the court tomorrow since it was in his safe deposit box with the bank. This, of course, was a blatant lie. Baker was going to try and run for it tonight. As he walked home, after all it was only about 2 miles, he planned his escape. Thankfully he'd had the foresight to keep an emergency stash of money at home. Together with his passport, he'd book an immediate flight to South America as soon as he got home. From there, he could get to the Caymans to find out what the manager had been talking about. He had never closed the account, and despite what he had been told, believed he still had nearly $10 million on deposit there. He arrived home just in time to see his Mercedes being loaded onto a flat-deck trailer. The driver, used to being abused by all sorts of people, let Baker rant, then just gave him a copy of the seizure order. His lease payment had not been made on time. If he wanted to discuss it, call the dealership. The driver was just doing his job. Slowly Baker trudged up the drive and, somewhat unsteadily unlocking the door, went into his house. Of course Honey wasn't there. He hadn't seen her since the day she was admitted to the hospital. He was positive that she had nothing to do with all of the events of the last couple of days. She just didn't have the brains for it. He poured a good, stiff scotch and called Air Canada, trying to book an immediate flight to South America. They had none available until 2 days from now. However, American and United both flew daily to all major cities in South America. Perhaps he could book with them. He called the toll-free number for American. If he could get to Seattle, they had a flight leaving for Chile at 1 a.m. the next morning. He had about 9 hours to get to Seattle in time for that flight. Too far to drive, and anyway, he didn't have a car. He was able to book a flight on Alaska Airlines to Seattle. It would get him into Seattle in plenty of time to catch his flight to Chile. Somewhat relieved that finally things seemed to be going his way, Baker went into his home office and opened the safe containing a stash of $200,000, his passport, and other important papers. Relieved that it was all there, he went into the bedroom and packed a small bag, packing only the essentials needed for a couple of days. Anything else he needed, he could buy at his destination. He called a taxi and was informed that the fare to Kelowna International Airport would be approximately $150, but they could have a car at his door in 20 minutes. He assured the dispatcher that this was satisfactory, poured another scotch, and sat to wait for the taxi. For what he thought was the final time, John Baker locked the front door of his home. Since he was traveling light, the cabbie didn't need to help him with his bag. He settled into the back seat, resigned to spending at least an hour and a half getting to the airport. At least they wouldn't hit rush hour. He timed to spare to catch his flight to Seattle. Almost 5 hours later, John Baker was unlocking the door to the house he thought he'd never see again. Try as he might, he was unable to talk his way off of the no-fly list and onto an airplane. Yes, that was him. Yes, that was his birthday and passport number, but he had never supported the Tamil Tigers. He wasn't even all that sure he knew who they were. The airport people were as adamant as they were apologetic. There was no way Mr. Baker would be catching a flight to Seattle or anywhere else this evening. The matter would have to be straightened out in Ottawa, and that could take a few days. Admitting defeat, Baker arranged for another taxi back to Melville. Adam, Sheila, and Honey knew nothing of what was going on with John Baker. Oh, Adam knew about the bank accounts and other things, but not the details of what Baker was going through. It had only been a couple of days, but he could sense that Honey was responding to Sheila's treatment. At least she no longer sounded or talked like a doormat. A week after Honey had been hidden away from John Baker, Adam received a call from his friend Josh. "Adam, I'm trying to get hold of Honey Baker. Do you know where she is?" he asked. "Matter of fact, I do. She's sitting on my patio drinking coffee with my sister at this very moment." "Why?" "Josh wouldn't call unless it was important. I've got some news for Mrs. Baker. Can I come out and see her? Or would she prefer to come into the detachment?" Well, I think she'd prefer that you come out here. How about we throw in a lunch? You can talk to her then." "Deal. I'll see you in a while." Josh ended the call. Well, it would either be welcome news or a disaster. It depended upon how she felt about what her husband had done now. Josh pulled up to the house just as Adam was leaving the garage. "See, you made it. Guess you public servants will do anything for free food," laughed Adam. "Yeah, well, you know how our poor salaries are," Josh laughed in return. "Look, before we go in, John Baker was found in his house this morning. He's been dead for 2 or 3 days. The coroner is still investigating, but it looks like he took an overdose of sleeping pills washed down with half a bottle of scotch." "Oh shit, where does that leave her?" "Well, she's a widow. Other than that, it looks like everything will have to be handled by a receiver. It's quite a mess. I just found out he was under investigation for numerous counts of fraud and theft. They had a special prosecutor handling the investigation. From what little they told me, he was looking at serious time. And he's got a bunch of really pissed investors, his victims, screaming from the rafters. Some very important people are thoroughly pissed and embarrassed." "Holy oh shit. I wasn't aware. Do you think she had anything to do with it?" "No, there's no indication she was involved at all. Unfortunately, Baker didn't leave a note or anything. Just a whole bunch of debt. He just remortgaged his house to post bond for the fraud and theft charges." "Come on, the women are out on the patio. I guess that's as good a place as any to break this to her. Just remember, she's had a pretty bad time of it. Sheila's treatments are just starting to work. Hope this doesn't set her back." Adam led Josh through the house and out onto the patio. After the introductions were made, Josh told Honey why he was there and gave her as much information as he could, which really wasn't all that much. More would come out in the ensuing days, but for now, as the next of kin, she had to decide what to do with the body after the coroner finished his investigation to confirm suicide. He would call Honey here, if it was all right, to discuss it in the next day or so. During the lunch that followed, Honey didn't say or eat much, almost as if trying to digest the news that the policeman had delivered. She felt neither sorrow nor relief, just a sort of numbness that comes with receiving what would be under normal circumstances, bad news. Her problem was she didn't think it was all that bad. Though she wanted away from Baker entirely, she hadn't wanted him dead. It would take her a while to come to terms with it. As Josh was preparing to leave, Adam asked, "What now, Josh?" "I mean, with Honey. She obviously had nothing to do with his death or any of his business dealings. Where does she stand in all this?" Josh had sort of been prepared for the question, expecting that it would be Honey who asked. "I really don't know. As far as I know, as of about an hour ago, the prosecutor was going to assign the whole file to an administrator and all them to sort out the whole mess. I know that at some point they'll want to interview her." He turned to Honey. "Honey, are you going to stay here? Is this where you can be contacted?" Adam answered for her. "She'll be here. I've already told her she can stay as long as she needs or wants to. She's still recovering from the hospital." Josh nodded. As he walked out to his cruiser, said, "Okay, I'll let the powers that be know. They'll advise you when they want to talk to her. You'll bring her in?" Adam nodded. "Whenever they need. Or they could come out here." Josh thanked his friend and drove off back into town. Adam returned to the patio where the women sat waiting. Honey spoke for the first time in quite a while. "You know, I never expected that would ever happen. I thought maybe I'd just get away and never hear his name again. I don't know what he was up to, but if they had a special prosecutor—" "Honey, I don't know all the details," answered Adam, "but he was running what's called a Ponzi scheme. Do you know what that is?" She shook her head. "No." "Okay, what he does, or what they do, is make promises of huge returns on any money that someone invests in his or their company, usually some kind of investment company supposedly trading in stocks, bonds, that sort of thing. Simplified, what happens is that new investors' money is used to pay the promised returns to older investors. Baker took it one step further and stole from his investors as well, salting the money away in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Okay so far? "So, that's the fraud and theft that Josh talked about?" Sheila asked. "Pretty much. Baker's problems began when I was able to log onto his business computer. Being the arrogant but that he was, he thought his security measures were adequate. They weren't. Long story short, I opened new accounts in different banks and stole all his money back from him. It's sitting in the accounts now. So you have started, honey. Well, in a matter of speaking, I'd prefer that this doesn't go any further than the three of us for now, but I opened two accounts, one for the money that Baker stole and a second one. What I hope to do is anonymously advise the administrator the details of the accounts and where and how to retrieve the money. There's almost $9 million. The investors won't recoup everything, but they'll get some of their money back, eventually. You mentioned a second account. What's that about? Asked Sheila, still trying to digest what her brother had done. Is stealing from a thief illegal? She wasn't about to worry about it. Adam could cover his tracks pretty well, and he hadn't obtained any of the money for himself. Yeah, there is. I promise full disclosure when the time comes. Until then, we never had this conversation. Right? Adam replied. Both of the women nodded. Honey was really worried, even scared, at what was going on. She thought that somehow she could be held responsible for all this mess. She and Sheila talked it over after Josh had returned to the garage. In the end, Honey agreed that it was useless to worry since there was so much they didn't know. Between them, they decided that they would do nothing and let Adam do all the talking except when it came to a formal interview with Honey. Sheila told her that either she or Adam, or both, would sit in with her. Sheila knew that as a doctor of psychology, she could testify to Honey's mental state, and if they did need a lawyer, Adam's was as good as any in the area. They hoped it wouldn't come to that. A couple of weeks went by. The three had gotten into a routine that varied little. Adam handled his business mostly from home anyway, so spent most days in his office. He would occasionally go to town and work from there, or go visit a client. He kept his overnight trips to a minimum. Honey had John Baker's remains cremated, and the ashes scattered in the area of the cemetery set aside for that purpose. Only the undertaker was there, no one else. Sheila continued to work with Honey. They'd have a counseling session in the morning, then go for a walk around the property somewhere, always accompanied by Teddy. After lunch and a short rest, there would be another session. Now that the fear of John Baker was eliminated, Honey responded well and quickly to treatment. Sheila would hate to leave, but knew she had to get back to her own home. She missed Jack and her kids. Telephone and Skype didn't substitute for actually being there. They understood why she had to be here, but it was time to go. Adam offered to pay her airfare, but Sheila preferred to drive. It would only take her about 3 days. Tears were freely flowing as Sheila took her leave. She promised Honey that she would be available if needed for the expected interviews. Adam made it plain that if she had to come back, she would fly and he would be paying. No argument. She hugged Honey and whispered, "Take care of my baby brother. He really cares for you, and I know you care for him. Let nature take its course." Honey hugged her back without saying anything. The look on her face was enough. Adam walked her out to her car. "Is there anything along the lines of what you were doing that I can help Honey with?" "No, I think I've done most of what I can do. The rest is up to her. She can call me anytime if she has questions. It's just a matter of her doing the work we talked about." "Okay, sis, I'll take your word for it. I don't know if I can ever repay you for this, you know? You went above and beyond, way above." Adam opened the car door for her and gave her a big hug. "Just look after Honey and yourself. She cares for you, you know? Really, really cares for you. Just be good to her." Sheila returned the hug, got into her car and drove off, hardly able to see the road through her tears. Not long after Sheila left, Honey was asked to come into town for interviews, first with the special prosecutor and then with the administrator assigned to straightening out the whole mess Baker had left behind. Adam assured her he would stay with her, and if they wouldn't let him, he'd get his lawyer to sit in. The interviews went easier than expected. The prosecutor was able to determine, quite quickly, that Honey knew nothing of John Baker's business affairs. He had deposited enough in a joint checking account to pay for household expenses. Her monthly allowance, or whatever she needed to spend, came out of that. She had only attended a few functions with her husband. Most of the time he was accompanied by his secretary at the time, or some other woman he conned into being with him. Yes, she knew about his affairs, and yes, he beat her. She had just began to learn over the past few weeks working with Sheila that there was something she could have done, but she certainly didn't know it at the time. The interview ended with the assurances that Honey would be out at Adam's property for the time being. She felt safe out there. The interview with the administrator went much the same way. He hadn't been able to discover what had happened to all the money Baker had stolen. He traced it to a bank in the Cayman Islands, but that account had been closed and the money moved. The bank had no knowledge of where the missing money had been deposited, and Baker certainly wasn't able to tell them. He readily acknowledged that Honey had no knowledge whatsoever of her late husband's business affairs, and certainly hadn't profited from them. He advised that the house had been overmortgaged and the bank was in the process of foreclosing. If she wanted, Honey could talk to the bank about getting anything she needed out of the house. Since she and Sheila had taken everything that Honey wanted at the time, there was nothing left there that had any interest for her. The bank could have the house and all the contents. He thanked Honey for coming in and said that as far as he was concerned, she was in the clear and probably need not be interviewed again. As Adam and Honey left the office, Adam picked up the administrator's business card. Good. It had his business email on it. So, Honey, what about getting some lunch now that you're a free woman? Adam laughed. I'd love some, but first can we go to the bank? I want to get an account in my own name. I don't know if there's anything left in that joint account, but if there is, I want to move it. For the first time in a long, long time, Honey sounded assertive. Okay, let's just walk. It's only a few blocks. Honey took his arm and together they walked down to the bank. They were able to get in to see the manager right away and get her to assist Honey. Since she was the sole beneficiary, there wasn't really any problem. The necessary papers had already been provided to the bank. There was one question, however. What about the safe deposit box? Honey had no idea what the manager was talking about. She didn't know about any safe deposit box and was certain she'd never seen a key for one. Perhaps it was in the safe in her husband's office at the house. The manager advised that the safe was found open and empty when the police began their investigation into his death. The keys couldn't be located in the house or in Baker's downtown office either. The box would have to be drilled, and no, Honey didn't need to be there for that. They would advise her when it had been done. Any contents would be kept in safekeeping until she could claim them. Satisfied that their business with the bank was finished, Honey and Adam walked up the street to a small family-owned diner to get some lunch. They settled into a booth, and after giving their orders to the young server, Honey said, "You know, Adam, this whole thing seems so surreal. It's almost as if it's a dream that I'm involved in. I don't know what I would have done if it wasn't for you and Sheila. I don't think I would have survived it." Adam thought for a minute before answering, "Look, you getting well is all the thanks I really need or want. Baker was a liar, a thief, and a bully. I didn't know you from, well, Eve, since I'm Adam, but I hate, absolutely loathe people like him. I wanted to ruin him in the worst way, but I didn't want him dead. I wanted him to suffer for a long, long time. Like most bullies, he turned out to be a coward in the end. But you and Sheila, you've done so much. I don't think I can ever repay you, either of you," Honey replied. "You've both done so much." "Well, I don't think I've done all that much unless giving you a place to live until you get straightened out counts. You needed help, simple as that." Honey wasn't convinced, but let it drop. "Okay, but I'm buying lunch. As you know, the bank let me have all the money in the checking account, nearly $5,000. At least I can buy lunch. Then I guess I should start looking for an apartment." "Okay, you buy lunch. As for the apartment, I said you could stay with me as long as you needed or wanted to." "Yes, but now I have some money, I don't want to be a burden anymore." $5,000 won't get you far," Adam said, flatly. "That's maybe a few months' rent and some groceries. Look, you're not a burden. Why not worry about accommodations after we're sure the dust has settled? I'm fairly certain that as far as you're concerned, it's all over, but until you have it in writing, you never know." "I suppose you're right. He might have pulled a fast one on me that I don't know about yet," Honey replied, resigned to making the best of what could be a bad situation. And she didn't really want to leave Adam's place. She felt safe and comfortable, and she was liking this gentle giant more and more each day. That night, Adam sent an email to the administrator using his untraceable account. In it, he gave the account access information and the approximate total on deposit in the account he had set up when taking. He didn't think of it as stealing the money from Baker. The administrator might suspect who had sent the email, but he really didn't have the resources to confirm it. At least the investors would get something back. Not much, but something. The second account he had opened for Honey was, of course, not mentioned at all. Days went by. Adam was busy with his consulting business. Honey had basically taken over the household chores, telling Adam in no uncertain terms that if she was staying there, she was contributing. After arguing about it for a few minutes, Adam resigned himself. When Honey mentioned bringing in the big gun, aka his sister Sheila, he admitted defeat. A few days after they had been in the bank, the manager called to advise that the safety deposit box had been opened and Honey should come in and review the contents. Adam took her to the bank that afternoon, where the manager handed her a couple of large envelopes full of documents. She didn't even know what they represented and asked both the manager and Adam. They looked like investment certificates of some kind. The three of them decided that the administrator of Baker's affairs should deal with them, and arrangements were made for the bank to get the documents to him. It was nearly 2 weeks after Adam had taken Honey into town when he found he'd have to take an overnight trip, and it might extend into 2 nights. Even with Teddy around, Honey didn't feel comfortable being in the big house all by herself. She and Adam talked it over, and it was decided that she'd come with him and sort of make a mini vacation out of it. He had already booked his favorite resort, one that allowed animals since Teddy was part of the team and would keep Honey company during the day while Adam was working. They packed up their gear and, with Teddy curled up on a blanket in the back of the truck, headed off to Maryville, a drive that would normally take the better part of 5 hours. It would be the first time Honey had been away from Melville for any length of time since she and John had moved there, and her first time ever in Maryville. She was excited and looking forward to it, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. They chatted away as the miles rolled behind them. They made a couple of rest stops, for themselves and Teddy, or when Adam would point out something of interest along the way. They arrived in the early afternoon. Adam tried to arrange a second, attached unit to his motel suite, only to find that everything was booked up in town due to some kind of festival. The only reason he'd been able to get a unit at short notice was because he was a good, well-established customer. He and Honey would just have to share. Adam opened the door to the unit. It was well-furnished and had a separate bedroom with a queen-sized bed and all the usual furnishings. The sitting room had a work desk with internet connections, as well as the entertainment center, a sofa, easy chair, and assorted coffee and side tables. "Honey, you take the bedroom. I can sleep on the sofa. It pulls out into a bed as well," said Adam as they began to get settled in. "Adam, I can't do that. You take the bed and I'll take the sofa. It's only right." "Well, that doesn't make any sense. Since I'll be getting up and leaving to work, I'd only disturb you getting ready, making coffee, and stuff. You take the bed." Honey gave a small smile and admitted defeat. She would have the bed, Adam the sofa. Teddy would have his usual spot on the floor near the door. That settled, they relaxed until dinner. Neither wanted anything fancy and found that the restaurant attached to the resort would be more than adequate. After dinner they went for a walk, Teddy running ahead and exploring old territory since he'd been there many times. Honey was thoroughly enjoying just being with this gentle giant, her knight in shining armor, as she put it. She was very attracted to him, and becoming more so every day. Her problem was that she didn't know if the attraction was mutual. Adam was having similar thoughts. He was falling in love with this beautiful, troubled woman. He valued her friendship and companionship and didn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. He knew she had feeling for him, Sheila had told him, but wasn't sure if it was for him, or a feeling of obligation for what he had done for her. He really, really hoped it wasn't the latter. Eventually they returned to the resort and settled in for the evening. Adam wouldn't normally bother with the TV, but felt that maybe Honey would want to watch a movie. He settled on a movie he'd heard about but never seen. "Adam, I'm going to change. Is there anything in the fridge to drink?" she asked. "I don't know. Usually there's some half bottles of wine or soft drinks." "I'll check." Adam opened the small fridge. "We have Coke, white wine, red wine, or water," he called out. "Could I have some white wine, please?" she replied. "I'll be right out." Adam poured 2 glasses of the Pinot Gris and settled onto the sofa. Honey joined him moments later, dressed in her PJs, a housecoat, and fuzzy pink bunny slippers. Adam hadn't seen those before. She never wore them in the house, and burst out laughing. "I've never seen those on a grown woman." He continued laughing so hard that he had to put the drinks down. She settled beside him on the sofa and punched his arm, giggling. "You leave my pink bunnies alone. They're warm and comfortable and I like them." Still laughing, Adam handed her a glass of wine. "To friends," he raised his glass to clink the rim of hers. "To friends and to guardian angels. I don't think I'll ever forget you or Sheila," she replied. Adam didn't say anything, just gave her a long, considering look and settled back onto the sofa. Honey snuggled up beside him, tucking her feet underneath her in the way that only women seem to be able. She snuggled closer to him, rested her head against his shoulder, and sighed contentedly. For the first time in a long time, she felt almost happy. "Adam, why haven't you tried to kiss me?" she asked. "Don't you like me? Aren't I attractive enough?" Adam, caught by surprise by the question, thought for a few seconds before answering. "I've been attracted to you since that first day down by the creek when I caught you trespassing. I value your friendship and love having you in the house with us, me and Teddy. I didn't and don't want to jeopardize that." He took a sip of wine and continued, "I know you're in some way attracted to me, Sheila told me. But I hope it's not because of what I did, getting you away from Baker. I hope it's just for me being me, but I don't know." She really hadn't thought of that. While she appreciated everything that had been done for her, the thought of her feelings for him being as a result of some sense of obligation hadn't really occurred to her. "Adam, I hadn't thought of it that way. I think I'm falling in love with you, not what you did for me. You're one of the kindest, most unpretentious men I've ever met." She reached up and pulled his head down to her for a kiss. I've been dreading the day when I have to leave. It's more of a home than I think I've ever had. I told you from the get-go, you can stay as long as you need, or until you want to leave. Your call. And I meant it, every word. He gently kissed her back. You went through a really bad time. I didn't want to rush anything, but I don't want you to leave either, until you want to. Am I making sense to you? I'm not sure I am to me. Honey slowly pulled away from him and sat her wine glass on the side table, then launched herself into his arms. You thickhead. For a smart guy, you can be pretty dumb sometimes. I just told you, I didn't want to leave, that I was dreading the day I would have to. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. He had to put his wine down, and then wrapped his arms around her. They stayed that way for some time, not moving or talking. Adam broke the silence. Does that mean you're staying on the sofa with me tonight? She couldn't see that he was grinning. Honey giggled. Well, I could, but wouldn't it be better if we shared the bed? I'm sure it's more comfortable. She gave him a long, lingering kiss. Definitely, sharing the bed is the way to go. Adam, I'm not sure about making love, but I just want to be held by you while we sleep. Can we do that? Of course, sweetheart. I promise. No pressure. But I'd better change into something other than my jeans. He released her and stood up. I'll just be a couple of minutes. I'll be waiting for you in bed. Hurry. Adam changed to his normal sleepwear, sweats and t-shirt, and joined Honey in the bedroom. Which side? Which what? Which side? What side of the bed do you prefer? Left, I guess. Yes, left. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Good, you get left. Now shove over. You're hogging my side of the bed. Adam laughed as he pulled the covers back and climbed into the bed. I hope you're not wearing your fuzzy bunnies. She giggled, not saying a word. She turned her back to him and moved back until they were spooned together. He wasn't sure what to do with his free arm until she took his hand in hers and pulled it around her. Contentedly, she sighed. Why did this take so long? I guess we're both a bit gun-shy, he said quietly. We've both been too hurt too often. No more. For sure. No more. Honey drifted off to sleep, held securely in the arms of the man she had come to love. Morning came too early. Adam woke up to find that during the night they had reversed positions and his back was to Honey and she was holding on to him. Gently he removed her arm so he could get up. He didn't want to, but he did have to do some work. He put the coffee and showered and shaved while it was brewing. Honey slept on, a small smile on her face, gently snoring. He drank his coffee and got his equipment together. He was meeting with his customer for breakfast, a normal routine. He quietly went into the bedroom and kissed Honey. See you later, sweetheart. One of us has to go to work. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a long, lingering kiss. That's better. That'll have to do us till later. Reluctantly, he left her to go back to sleep and went to work. The next night was a repeat of the first, just snuggling together to sleep. Adam knew that Honey was hesitant and was content to let her call the shots. The fact they had gotten this far was more than he had hoped for. Making love would come when she was ready. He could wait. The morning of the third day away from home, they woke up early. Adam wanted to get back home as soon as possible. Honey didn't really care one way or the other, as long as she was with Adam. Teddy, of course, didn't care too much either. As long as he was with his people, he was good. They didn't dawdle on the way home, and made it in just less than 5 hours. Over a quick coffee after they had arrived home, Adam explained that he had to go into the office for a couple of hours to finish what he had been working on. What he didn't tell Honey was that he was going to check with the prosecutor and the administrator to make sure Honey was, indeed, in the clear and no action was pending against her. He didn't want that hanging over her head. He stopped at the courthouse and was able to get in to see the special prosecutor despite not having an appointment. He explained why he was there, and the prosecutor quickly assured him that there was no reason to pursue any action against Honey. The whole file had been turned over to the administrator. He assured Adam that he would have his staff sent a letter to that effect to Honey, using Adam's mailing address. He stopped at the office where the administrator was located, actually not too far from the small shopping center where he had his own office. His discussion with the administrator took much longer. He was having trouble accounting for all the money obtained, spent, and stolen by Baker. It turned out that there had been around $30 million invested with Baker. Of course, some, about 20%, had been returned to investors as dividends. Someone had led him to an account in the Cayman Islands where they found about $9 million. The rest was, apparently, squandered by Baker. He still had more work to do, to determine which investors received how much as dividends. The money to be returned to them would be dictated by how much they had already received. Adam left the administrator's office with unofficial assurances that Honey was in the clear. There was absolutely no evidence that she had profited from Baker's actions, and in fact had probably been hurt by them, at least indirectly. The administrator said that he expected that it would be almost a year before the whole thing was cleared up. Adam made one more stop, then went to his office. He did the work he needed to do for his client in Maryville, worked on a couple of other inquiries from clients, then prepared to lock up. He decided to phone Sheila from the office instead of home. "Hi sis, how are ya?" "Adam, we were just talking about you. What's up? How's Honey?" He could tell his sister was curious that he was phoning from the office and not home. "Just wanted to touch base. Honey is fine. She's working on all that stuff you gave her. Says it's like having homework for school. I talked to the prosecutor. He's going to send a letter to Honey pretty much exonerating her. The administrator says it'll take about a year, but he thinks Honey's in the clear. He hasn't found anything where she benefited from what Baker did." "Well, that's good news. I'm happy things are starting to go her way. How are you two getting on? Are you getting it on?" Sheila giggled at the dual meaning. "Well, we're good, but we're not getting it on, as you say. She's still healing and I don't want to push it. Hell, we just kissed for the first time a couple of nights ago in Maryville." "You took her to Maryville?" "Yeah, I had to go do some work for a client. Took me the better part of a whole day. We were there 2 nights. She didn't feel comfortable by herself for that long, even with the ferocious Teddy here. So we all went. And curiosity was killing Sheila. And nothing. We slept together, just snuggling and sleeping. We're just beginning to understand that we have feelings for each other. I just hope she doesn't feel that way just for what I've supposedly done. I'd hate that. That's not why we helped her." Adam was trying not to sound worried. "Adam, don't worry about that. I don't think her mind works that way. Remember, I talked with her for a long time. The feelings she has for you are completely separated from her gratitude for helping her out. She sees you as her knight in shining armor, her protector. Don't blow it by worrying about it. Just trust your gut." She knew that sometimes Adam had a tendency to overthink a situation instead of going with his instincts. "You sure about all this?" Adam did sound worried, and maybe a bit scared. "Listen, little brother. She's probably very unsure of herself. You have to make the first move if you want this relationship to go ahead. Remember, she's been knocked down for so long. She doesn't know what up feels like. You're probably the best thing that's happened to her in a long, long time." "Okay, sis, I'll take your word for it. This time, I hope you're right." "I am. Remember, I do this for a living. I know how to read people." I remember. I just hope you're right. I don't want to scare her off. Just talk to her, for heaven's sake. She won't break. I already told her that if she needs help, I'm on speed dial. I gotta go. It's almost supper time. Go home and talk to her." With that, Sheila ended the call before Adam could say any more. While Adam was busy running his errands in town, Honey was also busy preparing dinner for the two of them, and of course Teddy. She found a good-sized chicken in the freezer, almost the size of a small turkey. She made some stuffing and put it in the oven. To go with her stuffed chicken, she decided on diced fried potatoes, fresh veggies, and a garden salad. Humming happily to herself, she continued to work, not knowing what was transpiring in town. Teddy didn't move far from Honey, sensing somehow that this particular member of his pack needed his protection more than Adam. He lay in the doorway of the kitchen, out of her way, but keeping an eye on her. Something smelled really good, and he wanted to be ready for any handouts. Honey noticed his ears perk up before she was aware that Adam's truck had just arrived. Teddy just stayed where he was, wagging his tail. His pack was now complete. Everyone was home. Adam stopped outside to look up at the sky. It seemed like you could almost reach up and grab a star, they were so bright. He loved nights like this, even if the air was quite cool. Shaking his head as if to clear it, he went inside the house. "Wow, something smells good." "You've been busy," he called out as he closed the door behind him. "Well, I thought it only fair I cooked dinner since you've been working. And anyway, it gave me something to do beside homework for Sheila," she giggled. "That I can believe," he laughed. "Look, get your coat or a heavy jacket and come outside. You've got to see this sky." She pulled on her boots and wrapped herself in a ski jacket off of a hook near the door. Oh my God, cried Honey as her eyes adapted to the darkness. "You can almost touch them. It's so beautiful. Too bad it's too cold to eat outside." She continued to let her gaze wander across the heavens. She had never seen, or at least noticed, anything like it. She shivered in the cold evening air. Adam put his arm around her and held her close like it was the most natural thing in the world. She made no attempt to move away. If anything, she tried to get a bit closer. Together they went back inside. The baking chicken did smell good. The meal was ready as soon as it finished baking. Honey estimated about 20 minutes. Adam, do you want a drink or a glass of wine before dinner? The chicken isn't quite ready yet. Wine would be good. I'll get it. Do you want some, or are you allowed? He got a nice Pinot Gris out of the fridge. I can have one glass. Sheila said it shouldn't affect my meds too much, but I don't want to take a chance. He poured the wine and handed her a glass. They moved into the living room and sat in companionable silence. Honey broke the silence first. You know, Adam, I just can't figure you out. Why? Haven't I dragged you into bed and had my way with you? Why didn't I try something when we slept together? Is that the whys? She nodded. It's two things, trust and respect. When we shared the bed in the motel, I admit I wanted so badly to make love with you, to you, but you weren't ready. You just wanted to be held. Remember, I know your background, what happened to you. I don't want to hurt you, and you trusted me not to. When you moved in here, I was hoping beyond hope that maybe somewhere down the line we'd develop a relationship, but I just didn't know. For all I knew, after what he'd done to you, you'd turn into a man-hating feminist. She giggled at the thought and couldn't picture it. She just didn't fit the mold. That had never occurred to me. I knew there was at least one good man out there. The one who looked after me, took me in, protected me. Between you and Sheila, I've become a whole person again. I want so much to love the man who did all that. It's you, Adam. I know I told you I just wanted to be held those nights in the motel, but if you had wanted to make love, I wouldn't have pushed you away. He responded, it's called trust. I gave you my word, and when I do, I keep it. It's also respect. Respect for you as a person. You probably haven't been respected as a person for years. You need to feel that again. Let me tell you a story about how my mind works. I don't know if it will scare you off or not. She nodded for him to continue. In my business, I deal with all kinds of people, but they all have one thing in common. They are my customers, my clients. Every business I deal with has a contract, but that's not why I deal with them the way I do. The contracts are just for lawyers and insurance agents. Every one of those deals was sealed with a handshake and my word, and I keep my word. That's why I'll drop everything if one of my customers out of town needs something done urgently, like this last trip to Maryville. My client needed help right away. I had given my word when I first took him, on as a client. It's as simple as that. Honey leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. All that, what you just said, is what Sheila told me too. Yes, before you ask, we talked about you. I didn't know if your feelings for me mirrored my feelings for you. Sheila said they did, but you'd be slow to act on them. She didn't tell me glacial, she giggled. Now enough of this. Dinner is ready. Let's eat. They got up from the sofa and she took his hand to lead him into the kitchen for dinner. Honey did move, eventually, but not out of the house. She moved into the master suite with Adam. He proposed to her down near the creek where they first met, and were married there almost a year to the day he had first seen her. He waited another year before telling her about her bank account in the Cayman Islands. Since it was money stolen by Baker, she didn't want it. She and Adam discussed what should be done, since as far as the administrator was concerned, the matter was closed. She decided to open a safe home for battered women. The money would be used to run it and support the women in need until it ran out. Honey continues to do photography, secure in the knowledge that she has the love and support of not only Adam, but friends and acquaintances as well. She has held several shows and is becoming more well-known for her work. Adam continues with his computer consulting business. He expands slowly, choosing his clients with care. He doesn't want to expand to the point where he has to have someone else look after his customers. Teddy died at age 12, a good long life for a mutt. He is buried near one of his favorite trees that he would sleep and dream under while guarding the property. Adam and Honey knew his health was failing and adopted 2 mutts from the SPCA to replace him. Adam and Honey are almost positive that Teddy trained them before he passed. They took over and share his duties, which, of course, mean taking care of their family. Sheila and her family visit every year. Even Honey's family from back east have come a couple of times. At first, they thought the sun rose and set on John Baker, and it was only after his death that they found how wrong they were and what Honey had endured. She has forgiven them. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.